Welcome to Friday's High Noon Club meeting. Good to have everyone here. Do we have any first-time visitors? Great to have you. Thanks for coming. Here's how you become a full member of the High Noon Club. Come twice. You just come twice. And there's no ever any dues, initiation fees. I mean, none of that kind of stuff. Just come twice. We're glad to have you. We consider High Noon Club to be a public forum for educating the masses about different policies, either federal and or state government or municipal type policies. So great to have you. Come back, come and go. There's no certain time you got to stay. There's no certain time you have to leave. Just make it fun for yourself, and hopefully it will be very informative in nature for High Noon Club members. Every High Noon Club starts out with an opening prayer and a pledge of allegiance to the American flag. I'll do the pledge of allegiance, and we're going to have Paul Sublett, the general manager for Vermont Radio in the Oklahoma City markets, is going to do an opening prayer, and also associate pastor of Olivet Baptist Church.
Thank you, sir. Don't owe you $5. Let's pray. Our Father in heaven, what a privilege it is to live in such a great country. And how sorrowful it is to see this great country fall apart and have you eradicated from it. I pray, Lord, this meeting today will give us information, build our courage, help us to stand for what's right, to stand for your word, to live for you, and to hang on to this great country with all that's within us. Help us to love you, keep you in our lives and part of our lives and the head of our lives. Use us in Jesus' name, I pray. Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Please be seated. Well, I'll tell you, this is bad. Here's what it means to start getting old. I almost forgot to pledge allegiance. There's a couple words there. I've only been doing this since I was in maybe kindergarten. How many realize that we don't do the pledge allegiance in our public school systems any longer? Then we wonder why there's no patriotism in America. We've lost our identity. So I'm going to say, do we have to re-legislate another bill at the Capitol to start prayer, or not only prayer back in school, but also the Pledge of Allegiance and flag? How many would be for that to have a bill out there at the Capitol that we're going to do the Pledge of Allegiance to America every morning in public school? Okay, legislators are here. There's your sign. This afternoon, we are very blessed to have another, what I'm going to say, a national guest speaker, Chris Holton from Washington, D.C. And we're going to, a little bit later on, I have Representative Sally Kearney introduce Chris. Sorry, Chris, that's the best we could do. And she will do the full introduction. Next week at High Noon Club, we're going to have another national type person coming to High Noon Club, and I encourage everyone to come back next week. It's going to be Phil Blumell from Term Limits USA. Most people in this room may know, but you may not know, so I'll just say it this way. This is part of my public announcement, is that we are running an initiative petition in the Oklahoma City area to term limit the city council and the mayor to 2 terms of office. And that would be one term would be 4 years, to limit that. Now this Oklahoma City term limits, what it would do, if you set a term out, then you could rerun. So it's not a lifetime penalty on you being a mayor or a city councilman. So we're doing that. And Phil Blumell, the president or executive director of U.S. Term Limits, will be in this room next week explaining some of the ideas of why we need to term limit people and some of the different thoughts and processes. How many people in this room believe that term limits should be on your Congress and Senate? Okay, a little polling on that. Okay, national. We've already got term limits in our state legislators, our senators, and our state representatives. And in 1990, just kind of give you a real quick little scenario. In 1990, we passed a bill that we voted on because it was changing our Oklahoma Constitution. It passed by almost 70%. It was literally like 68.8% when that passed. this term limits bill, last year, on term limits in the United States, there was about 90 of these they run throughout the country. They passed by almost 95% of those, so we say 95% of them passed. And what did it pass by? 70%. That's why they call it literally the 70% initiative. They get on the ballot, they will pass. The question I would ask, why would not a legislative body and or a city council propose that before their council and or the legislative bodies to let the will of the people, rather than people like us, who are volunteers, have to go out and collect petitions and do initiative petitions. I challenge our Oklahoma City mayor and also our city council, would you please put this on the agenda, rather than us hardworking people having to go out there and gather signatures and do this so that when we're actually doing the will of the people. So again, how many would be for that? Would you like to see this Oklahoma City, now only if you're an Oklahoma City resident now, this is not Edmondites or whatever, you all can do whatever you want there in Edmond, but and if you live in Oklahoma City, would you like to see that on the initiative? Okay, so we've got several people in favor of that. Okay, good. I'd like to make a quick announcement. If you're on Facebook, you go back to any of our meetings and look at the video of our different speakers or whatever, and I think that's going to be very worthy of your time. A lot of times, if you're out of town, you can go back, you can look at that, the previous guests, whatever. Representative Sally Kern, if you would introduce our guest speaker, we appreciate it. Now, what's going to happen here, if you're a first-time visitor, during our Q&A time, just raise your hand, I'll get around to you. When you get the microphone, would you please give us your first name only? Thank you. Go ahead, Ms. Representative Kern.
Thank you, Bob. I'm Sally, as you all know, and I'm really excited about our speaker today because this is a gentleman that I didn't think we had ever met, but he told me this morning he thought we did briefly a few years ago in New Orleans. And, I don't remember it, but anyway. But in the last probably 3.5 years, he and I have spoken literally hundreds of times, I think. He is the brains behind the American Law for American Courts bill that we finally got passed in 3 years, or last year. So he's extremely knowledgeable about what he's going to talk to you about, as well as other security policy topics. And I talked with Frank Gaffney about him and told him how much I appreciated Christopher, and Frank Gaffney had wonderful things to say about him. So we really are blessed today to have him. Let me just give you a short bio of him. He's the Vice President for Outreach of the Center for Security Policy. He is Vice President for Administration, Marketing, and Development at the Center. He came to the Center after serving as President and Marketing Director of Blanchard Company, and Editor-in-Chief of the Blanchard Economic Research Unit from 1990 to 2003. As Chief of the Blanchard Economic Research Unit in 2000, he conceived and commissioned the Center for Security Policy Special Report, Clinton's Legacy, The Dangerous Decade. Say that again. Holton is a member of the Board of Advisors of WorldTribune.com. And you're going to have some news for us, aren't you, about... Okay, he's going to have some news about his next adventure. He's going to speak to us today on the Galanist Islamic movement. How many of you know about this? Okay, a lot of you are going to get educated on this. It is a troubling influence, as the title of the paper says. We in Oklahoma have about at least 6 Galanist schools that are charter schools that your taxpayer dollars are funding. So I don't know how much he's going to go into that, but anyway, I think we're going to find what he talks to us about today very interesting. So let's give a hearty high noon welcome to Christopher Holton.
Thank you very much, Representative Kern. It's a distinct honor to be here in Oklahoma, which is no doubt the leading state dealing with the issues that over the past 10 years I've been working on with the Center for Security Policy. And very quickly, as a housekeeping item, as Representative Kern alluded to just now, I've been with the Center for Security Policy for 10 years, but we'll be leaving the Center for Security Policy and have joined Act for America, founded by Bridget Gabriel, working essentially in the same capacity as I've been doing over the past 10 years. And what I've done over the past 10 years is do education and outreach on issues involving jihad and Sharia law. Speak a lot on the Muslim Brotherhood, speak on the Iranian threat, speak on terrorism in general and jihad and Sharia law. But today, really for the first time, I'm going to be speaking on another aspect of the civilizational jihad threat. When I say civilizational jihad threat, we know about violent jihad, but civilizational jihad is more of a stealth movement where they move in our systems and use our laws and freedoms against us to infiltrate various aspects of Islamization into our culture, society, legal system, and in this case, education system. This is the first time I've ever had an opportunity to give a presentation on this, and I very much appreciate Representative Kern giving this opportunity. I think Oklahoma is an ideal place to begin speaking about this particular aspect of the threat, because the state has been the national leader on these issues. Now, the Gulenist Islamist movement is no doubt a rather obscure aspect of the civilizational jihad threat that we've been looking at since way before 9/11, actually. But it is one that is present. It is one that has been building up inside of our country. Fethullah Gulen, the founder of the Gulenist Islamist movement, is, depending on who you speak to, either a saint-like figure in the Islamic world or a sinister figure who poses a threat. The reality is somewhere between the two, but the truth is more towards the sinister version, because Fethullah Gulen has a definite philosophy and goal of establishment of an Islamic state, the caliphate, which is essentially the same goal as the violent jihadists have. Fethullah Gulen seeks a different method of establishing the caliphate, and if you look at page 1 of the handout that I distributed today, there's a quote from him which pretty much lays out what he wants to do and how he wants to do it. When he says you must move in the arteries of the system without anyone noticing your existence until you reach all the power centers, until the conditions are right, they must continue like this. If they do something prematurely, the world will crush our heads and Muslims will suffer everywhere. I mean, this is laying out a roadmap for infiltration and influence operations, and that's what we have. Now, he's from Turkey. What does an Islamic scholar from Turkey have to do with the education system here in Oklahoma or other places in the United States? It's a valid question. Well, it turns out that the Gulen movement has established 135 or so charter schools here in the United States. In fact, that makes them the single largest operator of charter schools in the United States. Now look, I'm in favor of charter schools. I think charter schools are great. I have a daughter that graduated from a charter school. It wasn't a Gulen charter school. And here's the thing. This is the bad apple that can ruin the whole bunch. And people who are very much involved in the charter school movement need to understand that. I think after this presentation today, I hope after this presentation today, first of all, I hope you have a headache, because this is not good news. But number two, I hope you're also awakened to the fact that given Fethullah Gulen's philosophy and what has been revealed about his movement, that you will see that the fact that they are instituting so many charter schools here in this country cannot be just regarded as a benign issue, that there is something else here, and it deserves investigation. And that's really what we're encouraging nationwide, is investigation into exactly what is going on here. So let's start off by talking a little bit about Fethullah Gulen and his movement. As I said, he's an Islamic scholar from Turkey, among the people who think that he's a saint-like figure, incidentally, are Bill and Hillary Clinton. They, over the years, have made public statements praising him. We don't hold the same view. When I say we, the folks that I work with do not hold the same view about Fethullah Gulen. His organization is very secretive. We'll explore that aspect of the Gulenist movement in more detail through the course of this presentation. He's got a tremendous amount of wealth. It is said that the Gulenist movement has $25 billion in assets worldwide. And they've amassed this rather quietly. And incidentally, they've done it without oil wealth, because Turkey is not an oil-rich nation. Now, Fethullah Gulen himself was prosecuted in Turkey unsuccessfully under the old regime, under the old secular regime in Turkey. And in the course of that prosecution, he left Turkey, came to the United States. He now lives in a fortified compound in rural Pennsylvania, the Poconos, which are, I guess, mountains. I'm from Louisiana, so to me they're mountains. Incidentally, one correction, I'm not from Washington. I seldom go to Washington and have a great desire to not go to Washington.
Good.
I wanted to clarify that. While my employer is based out of Washington, D.C., I work state-level initiatives, so I don't have to live in Washington. I live in Louisiana. In fact, you good people came recently to my hometown of New Orleans and defeated the University of Alabama, which is an LSU fan. I was very much in favor of that, and I appreciate you all coming and doing that. That's just an aside. At any rate, Fethullah Gulen now lives in Pennsylvania in a very secretive compound. Everything about the compound is secretive, in fact. And it's fortified, and there are armed guards all over the place. Which, when you have $25 billion at your disposal, you can certainly afford that. Within Turkey, the Gulenist Islamist movement is a major force. And we've seen a lot of political changes going on in Turkey over the last year, which are beyond the scope of this presentation. I mean, I could speak for 2 hours on that alone, and at the end of the 2 hours, you'd be sleeping for sure. But it's important to point out that within Turkey, the Gulenist movement controls the national police force and the judicial bureaucracy. Obviously, the judiciary in Turkey is set up very different from the way that it's set up in Western republics and here in the United States. But the Gulenist movement operates and dominates those two aspects, and that makes them very powerful. Last year, you may have recalled, there were protests in Turkey that were put down rather brutally. Those protests were put down by the national police. The military did not participate in putting down those protests. It was the national police that did so. The national police, as I indicated, is dominated by the Gulenist movement. So when you hear people say that Fethullah Gulen is this wonderful saint-like, peace-like, warm and fuzzy figure, you have to take that with a grain of salt, because his followers that are shooting water cannon at peaceful protesters throughout Turkey in 2013. In addition to that, because they control the judiciary and the judicial bureaucracy in Turkey, they've prosecuted a lot of members of the military over the years. And they have essentially decapitated the leadership of the military. That's a negative for the West, because the military leaders in Turkey were the secularists, the ones that were opposing the Islamization process that Prime Minister Erdogan has started. Erdogan and Gulen are rivals. They both have the same objective, which is the establishment of an Islamic State, but they're competitors toward that goal. And right now, the judiciary is pursuing members of the Erdogan regime with prosecutions. We're seeing a conflict building up between those two. And it remains to be seen what the outcome will be. But one of those two sides is going to win, so from the standpoint of the West, it really doesn't make any difference, because they're both very much in favor of establishing an Islamic State. And in fact, both see Turkey as reestablishing the Ottoman Empire, which was the seat of the caliphate before it was dissolved by Kemal Ataturk in the 1920s. That's what they reproduce. I have here in your handout a lot of information on the Gulenist movement and the various enterprises that they are involved in addition to the 1,200 or so schools worldwide, including the 135 charter schools, the 135 taxpayer-supported charter schools in the United States. They have a media empire of TV networks and newspapers and magazines, things of that sort. They also have things like a Sharia-compliant bank, Sharia-compliant insurance company, and they have think tanks, including one operated out of Washington, D.C. And when I say they have all this, they have aspects of this operating here in the United States, incidentally. So it's a $25 billion empire. Now, it's very difficult to get information on the Gulenist movement that is unbiased and authoritative. If you go to Amazon, when I started researching the Gulenist movement probably 4 years ago, one of the first things I do is I need to buy some books on the Gulenist movement. You go to Amazon and you do a search for books on Cthulhu Gulen and the Gulenist movement, and you get back a bunch of books about it, which I made the mistake of bombing and read, and they all read like advertorials. They're all looking at him from the standpoint of this is this saint-like figure. This is just this warm and fuzzy peacenik. And I mean, it's just unbelievable how fawning they are over this guy. But we do have 3 sources of information that paint a rather different picture of Cthulhu Gulen and its movement. The first is the WikiLeaks documents, are the WikiLeaks documents. There were documents released in that episode specific to Cthulhu Gulen. Now, the leftists who released those documents, I'm sure, did not want to release this kind of information had they known it was going to get out. But the reality is, if you look at the WikiLeaks documents that refer to Cthulhu Gulen, you come to find out that career U.S. diplomats had serious concerns about his movement in Turkey, and especially about his movement and the way that it used H-1B visas here in the United States to staff their charter schools. This appeared as early as 2006 in cables, in classified cables. Career U.S. diplomatic personnel expressed concerns about the Gulenist movement. They noticed that a large percentage of the non-immigrant visa applicant pool, in other words, H-1B visas, into the United States were people who were clearly Gulenists. But they also, there's an interview process that's supposed to take place when someone applies for that. And the diplomatic personnel said that they were almost universally evasive about the purpose of their travel to the United States and about their ties to the Gulenist movement. I mean, this goes back to 2006. And look, these are State Department personnel. So I don't know what you know about the State Department, but my experience with the State Department is they aren't exactly gung-ho. So if they have issues with these folks, can you imagine what the real situation is? They were also expressing concern that the Gulenist movement had a global Islamist agenda. When I use the term Islamist, they had an agenda of establishing a caliphate. Now, I mean, we can kind of snicker at that and say there's no way that will ever happen, but there's a lot of folks who want to see it happen. They're very motivated, they're well armed, and most of all, they're well funded. So to completely disregard that threat is a mistake. The U.S. ambassador to Turkey, James Jeffrey, in 2009, is the one that broke the news that the national police was dominated by the Gulenist movement. So that's how long the Gulenist movement has been in control of the national police in Turkey. And they also reported the rivalry between Erdogan and Gulen. Now, all of that information came from U.S. diplomats in classified cables, not meant for public distribution. So it was very frank discussion about what they really thought about these folks. And it's not good. The second source of objective information that we have about Gulen comes from the organization Stratfor, which is a private intelligence firm who had its email hacked and released by a hacker. It was unfortunate. In the process of releasing that information, there was a great deal of information that Stratfor was providing to its clientele about the Gulenist movement. And they reported, Stratfor did, way back in 2009, that the Gulenist movement had a vast social, economic, and intelligence network throughout the Western world. This is the $25 billion empire that I was referring to. They pointed out the Gulenist movement's messaging in the West was designed to appeal to the Western mindset. What these folks say inside of Turkey and what they say when they come over here, two very different things. And we've seen that throughout the jihadist movement. That's not unusual. That is SOP, Standard Operating Procedure. In fact, they found that many Turks were very scared of the Gulenist movement. Within Turkey, Turks who were concerned about the Gulenist movement, because the Gulenist movement was in control of the national police, they were very afraid to speak out publicly about the Gulenist movement and their concerns about that. And you see that today. When you control the national police in a regime such as what we have in Turkey, you can stifle dissent, and you can operate with a free hand because you've got your opposition intimidated. And they have taken action to intimidate that opposition, putting military leaders in jail, putting political leaders in jail, you name it. And Gulen, as indicated by the quote that we had at the beginning of this presentation, has been instructing his followers to be discreet and quiet. Another word for discreet and quiet might be secretive. Now, Gulen himself changed his messaging after he settled in Pennsylvania. It was very different in terms of his messaging, especially with regard to his desire to establish an Islamic State. He was in Turkey. He spoke about that openly. He came to the United States. Now, not so much. Doesn't say that anymore. I somehow doubt it's because he changed his mind. Now, another aspect of the Gulenist movement is that it's so secretive that nobody really knows how many members there are globally. We know there's about 1,200 schools globally in dozens of countries, but nobody really knows how many members it has in the Turkish community globally. So those are two independent sources, WikiLeaks, U.S. diplomatic cables, and Stratfor information on the Gulenist movement. But the best source of information on what makes Fethullah Gulen tick and what his goals are and what his philosophy is comes from a very obscure book that he actually wrote. This is out of the about 15 books that I bought on Fethullah Gulen. I found one that he had written, and it's called Prophet Muhammad as Commander. And it's a rather short book about Fethullah Gulen's interpretation of the Prophet Muhammad's career as a military commander, which, for those of you who've studied Islam, you know that the Prophet Muhammad was probably above all else a warrior. Fethullah Gulen has some very definite opinions on that. And I think one of the last copies of this book that was available on Amazon.com, because if you go to Amazon.com and try to buy this book now, they say it's not available and they don't know when it will be available. It was written and published in 1998. It's very short. Now, a lot has been written about the Prophet Muhammad. I'm not going to get into the Prophet Muhammad in this speech. It's more important, for our purposes, what Fethullah Gulen thinks about Islam and the Prophet Muhammad as a military commander. You'll see. The first 37 pages of this book has a lot of disturbing content. Now keep in mind, this is a guy whose movement operates more charter schools in the United States than any other entity in the United States. And these are his words. This is what he wrote. I'm not going to quote you Quranic scripture. I'm not going to quote anything that the Prophet Muhammad said that is written in the Hadiths or the Sirah. I'm going to quote to you what Fethullah Gulen, this guy who founded this movement, who lives in Pennsylvania right now, what he said in this book. This guy who Hillary and Bill Clinton say is a saint and a wonderful, peace-loving individual. We'll talk a little bit about what he said. And I'm going to do a little bit of reading here because I have not yet put this to memory. Probably never will be able to. In the first 37 pages of Prophet Muhammad as commander, Fethullah Gulen provides a window on his views of jihad and warfare. Here's a quote. The amputation of a gangrenous limb is an act of compassion to the rest of the whole body. But what could he do for those who persisted in unbelief? And he says he, the Prophet Muhammad, is who he's referring to. But what could he do for those who persisted in unbelief and actually waged war against him in order to destroy him and his message? He had to fight against his enemies out of his universal compassion that encompasses every creature. So God bless our little hearts. We have to have our heads lopped off because we don't believe. And that's essentially what that's saying. Now he goes on to say, a Muslim's enmity towards unbelievers is in fact the form of pitying them. So they hate us because they feel sorry for us. That's what he's saying. Did I mention that this guy's organization runs more charter schools in the United States than any other organization? I just wanted to remind you of that fact. Now here's one for you. This is a quote from Fethullah Gulen. It is a historical fact, which has been acknowledged even by many Western writers, that Christians and Jews have lived the most prosperous and happiest period of their history under the rule of Islam.
That sounds right.
Which writers were those? Because he says Western writers. I'm not sure which those were, but that's what he says. All right? Here's another one. God does not approve wrongdoing and disorder. He wills that human beings should live in peace, and accordingly that justice should prevail amongst them. It is therefore incumbent upon those who believe in one God and worship Him faithfully to secure justice in the world. Islam calls this responsibility jihad. Now, we don't want to get into the big debate on what jihad means, because if you listen to some of the Muslim Brotherhood operatives here in this country, jihad is a form of yoga. Rather than try to give you a big long explanation of why that's baloney, I'll just let you know that what Fethullah Gulen says about jihad, because he defines it in this book, Prophet Muhammad as Commander. So we don't even have to get into that debate. Where fighting is necessary, the Quran exhorts believers not to avoid fighting. When fighting is unavoidable, Muslims must not hesitate to take up arms and hasten to the front. The Quran exhorts Muslims to fight when necessary and severely reprimands those who show reluctance in mobilizing in the way of God. One of the important points to be mentioned concerning jihad is that a believer cannot flee the battlefield. So I guess he doesn't believe in the whole jihad is yoga theory, because as far as I know, they're not doing yoga on any battlefields anywhere. Fleeing on the battlefield is one of the 7 major perilous sins. Now we have sins in the Christian world that we know about. I don't think that one of our fundamental sins is fleeing on the battlefield. But according to Fethullah Gulen, that is a major sin in Islam. So on page 20, Gulen states specifically the purpose of jihad: to establish the supremacy of his religion and to make his word prevail. That's the purpose of jihad. And he says that jihad is necessary to achieve justice in the world. And justice in the world means that everyone worships one God and follows his law. Did I mention that this guy's movement operates more charter schools here in the United States than any other movement in the United States? Okay. Now, he then clearly articulates the aim of establishing a worldwide caliphate. Besides the holy struggle, the principle of enjoining the good and forbidding the evil seeks to convey the message of Islam to all human beings in the world and to establish a model Islamic community on a worldwide basis. Model Islamic community on a worldwide basis. Folks, that's caliphate. That's what he wants to do. I don't think he's got 1,200 schools around the world because he just has a hankering to educate young minds. Then, on pages 29 to 31 of Prophet Muhammad as Commander, he provides the conditions under which Islam is to use force. And then if you actually examine these three conditions, you'll see that they each have a loophole that you can drive in that truck through. And essentially what it amounts to is that there is no condition under which Islam is not permitted to use force. So the first one is, if unbelievers resist the preaching of Islam and try to block it from winning the hearts and minds of the people. So that's condition one under which Islam is allowed to use force. If Muslims are wronged, to end persecution and the worship of false deities. See what I mean? Some loopholes in those three, aren't there? You can interpret that to mean just about any condition anywhere. Those are the conditions under which Fethullah Gulen says that Islam is allowed to use force. Did I mention that Fethullah Gulen founded a movement that operates more charter schools in the United States than any other?
No way. Really?
That's a fact. Now, finally, in Prophet Muhammad's Commander, I think perhaps the most chilling quote that appears to me, and you tell me if you think I'm wrong here, appears to me that this is an endorsement of the Islamic world acquiring nuclear weapons. Believers should equip themselves with the most sophisticated weaponry. Force has an important place in obtaining the desired result, so believers cannot be indifferent to it. Rather, they must be much more advanced in science and technology than unbelievers, so that they should not allow unbelievers to use force for their selfish benefit. According to Islam, right is might, so in order to prevent might from being right in the hands of the unbelievers and oppressors, believers must be mightier than others. An Islamic state should be able to secure peace and justice in the world. Remember, we defined justice a little while ago. Probably not what you and I would think of as justice. An Islamic state should be able to secure peace and justice in the world, and no power should have the courage to make corruption in any part of the earth. This will be possible when Muslims equip themselves with a strong belief and righteousness in all their affairs, and also with the scientific knowledge and the most sophisticated technology. So,
An iPad.
what does that amount to?
But their religion first.
This reads an awful lot like it called the Muslims to form a caliphate and arm themselves with nuclear weaponry, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, I guess it could mean something else, but I haven't been able to figure it out. So, let's talk a little bit about those schools, because that is the instrument through which Gulen operates, especially in this country, but other parts of the world as well. It just so happens that the issue in this country is that his schools are taxpayer subsidized. That is the issue. He's got a network of 1,200 schools around the world, which are a cash cow for his movement. And essentially what they do is through a system of kickbacks. They build up cash for the movement. They bring in staffers and teachers and pay them, and then the staffers and teachers are members of the Gulenist movement, and they kick back part of their salaries to the Gulenist movement. It's kind of like a pyramid scheme, I guess, and it's kind of how they amassed $25 billion. They've been doing this around the world. And they don't just do it through schools around the world. I mean, they have the media empire, they have all this other stuff that I mentioned. But here, our immediate problem is what is going on with these schools. Now, in non-Muslim countries, such as the United States, sorry Barack, teachers and Gulenist students extol the virtues of Islam. In Muslim countries, they extol the virtues of the Gulen movement to pull in more members. In non-Muslim countries, the schools provide a softer passageway to the Gulen movement. Now, the Gulenist schools, this is very important, are not madrasas. They are not Islamic schools in the sense that they teach Quranic rituals and things. Like you've seen probably footage of the madrasas in which, I mean, they bring in 13-year-old boys and they teach them to memorize the Quran. And that becomes their education, which explains how they can find so many jihadists to be cannon fodder in the world, because that's all these kids know. That's not what Gulen does. Gulen schools actually are pretty good in terms of their educational prowess. That's one of the problems we have in cracking this nut, as it were. And that what they do here in the United States particularly is they'll go into a at-risk area where the public schools are failing, and they'll take over a public school and they'll establish a charter school. And it's like low-hanging fruit. They'll show an improvement in scores because, I mean, if all of a sudden you start teaching these kids at all, like you're going to see an improvement in scores in some cases. And that's what they do. So this is something that it's been difficult to convince the charter school movement nationwide that, hey, this is something that you all need to be wary of, because this could infect and bring down your whole movement, which would be a shame, because charter schools are a good thing. Gulenist charter schools, not so much. Let's look at some of the characteristics of charter schools here in the United States. The control of the school's policies and finances lies entirely in the hands of Gulenists. Not everybody that works at a Gulen school is a Gulenist or a Muslim or a Turk. But the controlling entities, the principal, a lot of the faculty, boards, things like that, are Gulenists. This allows the Gulenists to use the schools in ways to further the Gulenist movement. Now, they work on the model that Fethullah Gulen expressed in that quote about operating in the arteries of the system in a very quiet way. So they're not madrasas. They're not using taxpayer-supported funds to indoctrinate kids in jihad or the Quran or Islam. They don't do that. They educate them, and it's a very soft, indirect sell, as it were. Usually Turkish language classes are mandatory, which is kind of unusual. There is an overt emphasis on Turkish culture, which is kind of odd in most cases. They provide sponsored trips to Turkey, which is kind of a sore subject, I know. They have a large number of Turkish or Turkic teachers, administrators, board members, and ancillary support staff. Not all of them, but there are large numbers of them. And they have an unusually high usage of the H-1B visa program. Now, the H-1B visa program is a non-immigrant worker program where they bring in foreign workers without any intention of them becoming U.S. citizens or settling here. They come in here for a short period of time, they work, and they leave and they go home. There's a rotation that occurs in these school and charter schools that we've detected. It's almost as if these are H-1B visa mills about getting these folks into the country. Another characteristic of Goulin charter schools is that the FBI, the Departments of Labor and Education, have begun investigating at least 2 practices of concern involving the Goulin school wide. Number one, their extraordinary and high and disproportionate utilization of H-1B visas to import teachers and other personnel from Turkey to staff their schools. Almost certainly discriminatory in terms of this practice. When you look at the demographic figures of the folks that they conduct these operations with, that is a chief concern, and it's one reason why the federal government has been looking into them. They also have investigations about reportedly higher pay for Turkish staffers who are then directed to return a portion of their salaries to the Goulinist movement. That's what we talked about. This is something that happens around the world, and it's not considered a big deal. It's a big deal here in this country because, after all, these charter schools are taxpayer supported, right? The Goulin schools are responsible for more H-1B visa applications than any other entity in the entire United States. The single biggest applicant for H-1B visas in the entire United States comes from these Goulin schools. And everybody that they apply for is Turkish or Turkic, Muslim, and male. Discriminatory in its effect. Another characteristic of Goulin charter schools are the number of scandals that have arisen surrounding Goulin charter schools. If the last few pages of your handout, I've provided 19 examples from mainstream media sources about scandals arising around Goulin charter schools here in this country. Trouble just seems to find its way to these schools. You couldn't find a more severe pattern of corruption and scandal in an entity than you find in Goulin charter schools. They're not madrasas, they're not teaching jihad, we have no evidence that they're producing terrorists, but there's something amiss here. There's something going on. Just in my home state of Louisiana in the past few years, there were 2 charter schools in Louisiana. One was a school called Abramson down in New Orleans. There was a scandal that arose at Abramson involving inappropriate sexual contact between 2 young students in this grammar school, okay? This came out, and there was an investigation conducted by Bessie, the Board of Elementary and Secondary Education in Louisiana. A board member from Bessie went to the Abramson Charter School to meet with officials there. And a member of the Goulinist movement flat out looked at him and said, "I've got $25,000 to make this go away. How can we make that happen?" The member of the board reported the attempted bribe. Shortly thereafter, Abramson lost its charter, but the controlling organization for the Goulinist movement that had Abramson's charter had another school in Baton Rouge, the Kenilworth School, and that school continued to operate. And in fact, Bessie renewed their charter earlier this year in Louisiana. In the meantime, unfortunately, the largest single donor last year to the Louisiana Republican Party just happened to be the Goulinist movement. Gave $83,000 to the Louisiana GOP. And then shortly thereafter, the Kenilworth School got its charter redone. a state rep in Louisiana named Cameron Henry introduced a bill to look into this and to limit the number of H-1B visa employees that could be used in the charter school in Louisiana. And they came out of the woodwork to label him a bigot because of this bill that he had done. And everybody sang the praises of Kenilworth School. Literally days after this occurred and Kenilworth saw its charter reinstated, a teacher at Kenilworth School was arrested for having inappropriate photographs of a child on his cell phone. Now, that's got nothing to do with the Gulenist movement, but if you look at all these different scandals that I have listed here, and anybody that wants to email me, I will be happy to send them an electronic form of this presentation so they can click on the links and go read all this stuff. When you look at it in that context, it's like, what else can possibly happen? Well, I'll tell you what else can possibly happen. The FBI raided Kenilworth about a month ago, and there is a sealed indictment right now surrounding Kenilworth, the last remaining charter school in Louisiana. The last remaining Gulenist charter school in Louisiana. So this is a pattern of scandal and corruption surrounding these schools that is cropped up. And here's we know that the FBI and the U.S. Department of Education is investigating them. We don't know the aspects of that. We know that there has been a discrimination lawsuit filed against a Gulen charter school in Pennsylvania. We know that Abramson Charter School in New Orleans was shut down in a bribery scandal. We know that Kenilworth Charter School was raided by the FBI. We know that a Gulen Charter School in Ohio is now under investigation by the Department of Labor. We know that there is a scandal in Peoria, Illinois for a Gulen Charter School that's ongoing, in which the operator of the charter school denied that he was a Gulenist, and then a member of the faculty said, I don't know why he says that, because I traveled with him to go visit Bethune Gulen. So you can go and read that. I'd be happy to, again, send this electronically to anybody that just wants to click on the link. There's a scandal in Massachusetts about a Gulen school that got high ratings, and then they come to find out after the high ratings that they faked the data. In Georgia, 3 Gulen schools were involved in a financial scandal, and then subsequently at least one of them was shut down after an audit of the Gulen charter schools. A Minnesota Gulen charter school was found to have culled out special needs children. I mean, their whole impetus is to try and show really high test scores, and special needs children make that more difficult, and they sought to cull those students out, which is a violation of their charter. That happened in Minnesota. A Texas Gulen charter school administrator is being investigated for academic fraud. There is an audit of a San Antonio, Texas Gulen charter school, which revealed extensive misappropriation of funds. Incidentally, there are more Gulen charter schools in Texas than any other state in the country. There was a scandal in California in which the California Commission on Teacher Credentialing chief, the head of that organization, was also in conflict of interest, found to be on the board of the Gulen charter school. There was a 2007 legal case between Columbus, Ohio charter school and the Department of Labor, in which they did find, in fact, that there was improprieties involving H-1B visas and things like that. There's a scandal on another Texas Gulen charter school in which a Texas Gulen Charter School Association was awarding contracts to Turkish firms over lower bidders. And that's something that has occurred over and over again with these Turkish charter schools, is that everything from construction contracts to you name it go to members of the Gulenist movement. They give priority treatment to that, which is fine if you're running a private school, but if you're a taxpayer-supported charter school, that's not such a good thing. In Utah, there was an audit which showed that a Utah charter school spent $100,000 on textbooks when it was established itself, and $53,000 on immigration fees. So they spent 50% of their textbook budget on immigration fees. So those are just examples of scandals involving Goodwin charter schools. But to me, the most worrisome aspect of this is the overall movement and beliefs of their founder, and the fact that they're so secretive and that they don't even want to admit that they're associated with him. And of course, the fact that he has told them to be secretive. It's a worrisome threat that needs to be addressed through sunshine, through good government, through, not bills to shut these places down, but bills to make sure that everything's on the up and up. The people who support these schools through taxes have a right to know, through their elected representatives, that there's no improprieties going on, that no laws are being broken, that there are not discriminatory hiring practices going on. This is, I think, a proper function of government and a proper function of a proper regulatory aspect of government. And the charter school movement should support this, because they can't look at this pattern of impropriety and ignore it, because it will hurt them. The teachers' unions hate charter schools, and they will use this to attack the overall charter school movement. And we don't want to shut down the whole charter school movement, but this is getting in the way. So that concludes my prepared statement, and if anybody would like to ask questions, I'd be happy to take questions.
Great job in the presentation. We got questions, and I'll start looking at Mike around the room right now. Let me go up here front.
Wait, before I start, did I mention that?
Yeah, I think we got that.
Thank you for your presentation. My name is Paul. Has it been documented that the Turkish teachers are in fact required to send this money back, or is it estimated? We could look at their tax filings and find out from there. Clinton's can.
There is a ongoing investigation right now about that specific aspect of the thing that the FBI is conducting. I don't know that there's been anything published on it yet.
Second
But if
question.
you look at that 2007 case, which is listed towards the end of this, there may be something in there about that.
Could the H-1B visa system for migrant workers as well as it was for migrant teachers?
I'm not an expert on the H-1B visa process.
Totally different issue.
Everybody, thanks for coming.
Thank you for having me.
Now, I got a question on the relationship between these Goodwin schools and like the unindicted co-conspirators in that trial back with that, CARE.
Holy Land Foundation.
Holy Land Foundation, yeah. Is there any relationship between these guys and like CARE, et cetera?
Not that I know of. Not that I know of. This is a separate movement from the Muslim Brotherhood. This is a different group that we have to worry about.
Question.
Hello, my name is Brent. I have a quick question. You mentioned the Islamic State and Caliphate as being one and the same.
Well, a global Islamic State would be a caliphate. An Islamic State could be regional as well.
So when you say Islamic State, do you mean with boundaries? Could you go into that a little bit more in depth?
Well, Iran is an Islamic State. Saudi Arabia is an Islamic State. But when Fethullah Gulen made the statement that we want to establish a model Islamic community on a worldwide basis, he doesn't say caliphate, but Islamic community on a worldwide basis, that is the definition of the
That
caliphate.
is what we're talking about. Okay. And also, is this Fethullah Gulen, is he an American citizen?
No, sir, he's not.
And who would you say is the most prominent or effective leader of the Muslim movement?
It's not a homogeneous movement. I don't think there's any one person that we can point to who was, I mean, look, the Ayatollah Khamenei of Iran is certainly a leader of the global Islamic movement in one aspect. Ayman al-Zawahiri, the head of Al-Qaeda, is a leader of the Islamic movement in some respect. The former president of Egypt, Morsi, is obviously a leader of the Muslim Brotherhood. There is a Sharia scholar named Yusuf al-Qaradawi, who is an ideological head of the Muslim Brotherhood, who is a very prominent worldwide Islamic leader. I mean, and all these guys are kind of different. They are, little different stripes.
With the same goal in
Well,
mind.
hold on, we can't hear, we're trying to video record and questions. Do you want to ask the question?
Yeah.
With the same goal in mind, each and every one of them?
Well, overall, they want to see, all of these movements have one goal, and that is the implementation of Sharia law. There is a myth out there that the goal of jihadist and Islamic movements, like the Muslim Brotherhood and Hizb ut-Tahrir, Al-Qaeda, you name it, there's a myth that their goal is that we convert to Islam. They're happy for us to convert to Islam, but their goal, and they've stated this over and over again, their goal is the implementation of Sharia law. And that is what they seek. And whether we convert to Islam or not is immaterial for them, but as far as they're concerned, we should be forced to live under Sharia law. That is the goal. And certainly the individuals that I mentioned, all of them have that goal. Now, they may see that goal different than the others. For instance, Yusuf al-Qaradawi, who is perhaps the most prominent Sunni Sharia scholar in the world, probably sees the end state different than the Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, who is the head of Iran, who is a Shia. They probably have a different vision of what that looks like at the end, but they both definitely want to see the implementation of Allah's law, Sharia, on a global basis.
Real quick little poll. Is there anyone in here in this room interested in converting to Islam? Please raise your hand. Okay, next question.
My name is Phyllis, and I want to know, of all the charter schools, how do you know which ones are these student schools?
I have not researched Oklahoma in specificity, but that is something that we will do. We'll get that information to you. If you look at the characteristics of the charter schools that are Gumanist, though, they stand out pretty readily in terms of the number of Turkish names associated with them. I mean, Turkish names are very distinct.
Question.
Hi, I'm Connie. As an American, I get very frustrated when I'm trying all the time to fight for Christian religious freedom. And in doing so, just like with Obamacare, with the latest mandate for abortion, sometimes I feel like indirectly, without knowing it, I am aiding Sharia law, because they then can come back, it being their religious freedom, to impose that more and more on us. How do we get around that?
That's a really good question. Let's make a distinction between Sharia and everything else. First of all, unlike other religions, Islam is not just a religion. Islam certainly has a religious component, but Islam is an entire civilization. It has a religious component, a political component, a military component, a judicial component, a cultural component, a social component, you name it. And this is personified in the role of the mosque in the Islamic community. A lot of people in the West equate a mosque with a church. That is not actually correct. A mosque is in fact a church, but it is also the courthouse, and the town hall, and the local National Guard armory. So Islam cannot be viewed in the same context. And then when you break it down to Sharia, you look at the aspects of Sharia, very little of Sharia has to do with religion. If you look at Sharia law textbooks, Sharia law covers everything. It covers what I say to you when you sneeze. And then I say something different to you if you sneeze a second time. That's on the low end of the spectrum. On the upper end of the spectrum, in Sharia law, it is codified the conditions under which an Islamic state goes to war. So think of that spectrum and everything in between. Very little to do with religion. Most of that is political and military and judicial. In addition to that, Sharia is unique among all forms of religious law in that, unlike canon law or Jewish law, canon law is designed to apply to Christians in an ecclesiastical sense. Jewish law is designed to apply to Jews. Sharia is the only form of religious law known that is designed to apply to people of all faiths. So if I'm Christian, you're a Jew, my canon law is not designed to apply to you. Your Jewish law is not designed to apply to me. Sharia law applies to everyone. That's the distinct difference, and it's very important to understand. So that's got nothing to do with religious freedom. They can say it does. The one narrow aspect of Sharia that has to do with, praying 5 times a day and all that stuff, nobody's got a problem with that. But if you look at the full body of Sharia, that's a very small aspect of it.
Good question, great answer. Love the answer on the part of describing or defining what a mosque actually is. Like that. Next question. You got to stand up and give us your first name, or you will be beaten severely.
I don't know how many of you watch Minuteman News. It's a form of news that you get email every day, and there is an article in there that the Egyptian army is suing Obama for contributing our American tax dollars to Morsi, and Morsi, as we know, had murdered many Christians in Egypt. And also our tax dollars have gone to Africa to support his brother Obama, who is murdering Christians in Africa. And I don't know if you're aware of this or not, but it is, have you heard about this? And they're going to try to subpoena him and bring him to Egypt, is what I've heard.
Look, the Egyptians believe that they've uncovered smoking gun evidence of Obama administration aid to the Muslim Brotherhood. Look, we've got clear evidence that Obama is at least sympathetic toward the Muslim Brotherhood, has been since he got into office, and there are members of the Muslim Brotherhood who are members of his regime. There's just no question about that. I mean, I do a different presentation on the Muslim Brotherhood. I'd love to come back and give you that hour and a half of unpleasantness. But, I mean, the Reader's Digest condensed version is, yeah.
Well, I'm Sally, and Christopher, first comment, the Cosmos Foundation and the Harmony, is there Harmony Foundation? These are two groups that are going around in different states, stop me if I'm wrong, who are requesting that you have these Hulan charter schools. So there's at least two foundations. And I believe it's Harmony is the one that has done the schools here in Oklahoma. My two questions on these H-1B visas, and I've got all the information from here in Oklahoma, and it's, you just wouldn't believe, but is it not true that sometimes these people will come in and they will work at a school 1 or 2 years and then they kind of disappear?
Sometimes not even 1 or 2 years.
Yeah,
sometimes, we've heard reports of guys show up for 6 weeks and then they don't show up anymore. And where they go, what they do, it's anybody's guess.
And the second question is these trips, these legislative trips to Turkey that has been happening. Texas has done some.
It's going on across the country. Absolutely.
Is there any connection between those trips and the Zionist movement? Are they trying to persuade? What, do you have any comments on that?
There is a connection. It's not just the Gulenist movement that is doing that, but the Gulenist movement works in the realm of commerce very actively and encourages commerce as a means of promoting the movement. But the overall Turkish community is also promoting that. Remember when I mentioned that Erdogan and Gulen are rivals, but they both have the same basic goal. So they work together on that aspect of the thing. There's no question about it. There is Gulenist involvement in that, but it's not all Gulenists. There are representatives of the Erdogan regime who are involved in that. And in a separate handout that I gave to you all, I laid a case out for why, if you're a legislator, you probably should think twice about going on a trip to Turkey, because guess what? They're an ally in name only. Turkey is not what Turkey was, and it's getting worse and worse all the time.
Is there any way of getting a list or breaking that thing down when the Gulen movement is sponsoring these legislators? I mean, is there a way to break that down so we kind of know? Or
I don't know. I don't think there is a list where the Gulen movement is sponsoring legislators. Okay, but certainly there is information about trips that have been taken by public officials to Turkey. And it's not just legislators. I mean, the mayor of Lafayette, Louisiana, led a delegation on a trade trip to Turkey. I mean, they are very active in promoting that kind of thing. And look, this is all, I think, subject to FOIA requests, Freedom of Information Act requests. But I think you have to request it. You're not going to be able to just go on the internet and look it up, because this is not information that's going to be volunteered.
question?
Hi, Mike. You mentioned commerce. I saw recently, within the past 12 months, I believe, that one of our congressmen has partnered one of the tribes with the Turkish government for economic development. Have you seen other kinds of partnerships like that? It looks like they want to hook up into a foreign trade zone and things of that nature, and that's kind of alarming. And I just wondered if you've seen other things like that.
It doesn't surprise me. I haven't seen that. I was not aware of that. But it certainly doesn't surprise me, because they've been extremely aggressive in just about every state capital in putting on dog and pony shows for legislators. And they're active in the halls of Congress as well. But I mean, that's news to me, and I appreciate you bringing that up, and it's something that I'm certainly going to want to get more information about.
Question.
I'm Maggie, and there is a Turkish house here in Oklahoma City, in the
Teardrop.
The Rainbow House. So, anyways, they are very strongly active in this organization called the Interfaith Dialogue.
Yeah.
I forgot exactly what it's called, but they have a lot banquets and awards, and I just wondered if you had any. I made that connection from hearing you talk about the Turkish things.
Those types of names, I don't know specifically about the organization that you mentioned, but those types of names are typically Gulenist names. In some cases, they're Turkish organizations that are not affiliated with the Gulenist movement, but these cosmic type names, these intergalactic type names, appear over and over again in the Gulenist movement globally. So I mean, that's something that, it certainly sounds kind of like what this is, without looking specifically into that. I don't know for sure. Now, when you talk about interfaith dialogue, the problem that I have with most of these interfaith dialogue programs is that they tend to be very much one-way streets. It's like when the FBI has their Office of Muslim Affairs, and different organizations have Muslim outreach. And Congressman Louis Gohmert asked a very uncomfortable question of the FBI director: "How is your Presbyterian Affairs Department doing?" why do we have to have all this outreach to the Muslim community if there's nothing amiss? So.
Question.
My name is Joe. Thank you for coming today. Your comment here, or your quote on one of your papers here, says you must move through the arteries of the system without anyone noticing your existence until you reach all power centers. I looked up that quote. It was basically a long speech by Mr. Gulen. But in there he says you must wait until such time as you have gotten control of all state power. The Muslim, Turkish people do not hide what their intent is. Why are not people taking this more seriously as a threat? Ms. Kern here passes the American law for American courts, and we get nothing but criticism about it.
Believe me, I feel your pain.
Did you watch Jill last night?
You know, Representative Kern, you know, has done a lot of great work here. And American laws for American courts is one step, but there's a lot more that remains to be done. And look, I would disagree with one thing. In some cases, they do reveal what their intent is. But in other cases, they don't. I mean, they're not always completely forthcoming. We have this quote from Abdullah Gulen himself, but then you have all these instances of members of the Gulenist movement denying that the Gulenist movement even exists. And you know, if you go to some of the links that I provided, I mean, you'll run into that over and over again. So the answer to your question is, yeah, but that's not really the whole picture. Does that kind of answer your question?
It does. It goes along with what we've heard before, that you can lie to the infidel for religious purposes. It's
Taqiyya is a doctrine within Sharia law. And for those of you who'd like to know more about that, there is a textbook which you can buy off of Amazon.com for $29.95. And I bring it for my other presentations. It's called The Lies of the Traveler. It was written several hundred years ago. It is the most widely read, probably, book of Islamic sacred law. And it's got a whole section on permissible lying. And one aspect of Taqiyya, which is sacred deception, isn't that a remarkable concept, sacred deception? Taqiyya, one aspect of Taqiyya is that Muslims are not just permitted to lie to promote their religion, they are required to. So, I mean, and that's a very troubling thing. I mean, and that is in their law. I mean, this isn't something that, you know, somebody made up and says this exists, but it's not written down anywhere. It's written down everywhere.
You know, Chris, thank you very much for coming to High Noon Club. Great presentation.
It's my pleasure. I love it.
Would you come back and talk to us at High Noon Club?
Come back anytime y'all want to.
Appreciate it very much.
And go window shopping.
But again, everybody give him a big round of applause. Thanks for coming. Now, what we're going to do is we've got a little video at the very end of this meeting we're going to play for you to get you more fired up. Now, let's really think about this. We talked about this a little bit before. Anytime you get private government relations together, guess what doesn't happen? You have no right to audit a private corporation. So stay away from them, folks. Okay, this is one of them right here. You got no way to audit, no way to check, none of that kind of stuff. The reason we created government so we could actually audit these people, right? Okay, now here's our video. Let's go. Ready, Maestro?
How's this for apocalyptic literature? We were told it was written by a pastor's wife in biblical prose as a commentary of current events. It is brilliant. And it came to pass in the age of insanity that the people of the land called America, having lost their morals, their initiative, and their will to defend their liberties, chose as their supreme leader that person known as the One. He emerged from the vapors with a message that had no meaning, but he hypnotized the people, telling them, "I am sent to save you." My lack of experience, my questionable ethics, my monstrous ego, and my association with evildoers are of no consequence. I shall save you with hope and change. Go, therefore, and proclaim throughout the land that he who preceded me is evil, that he has defiled the nation, and that all he has built must be destroyed. And the people rejoiced, for even though they knew not what the one would do, he had promised that it was good, and they believed. And the one said, "We live in the greatest country in the world. Help me change everything about it." And the people said, "Hallelujah! Change is good." Then he said, "We are going to tax the rich fat cats." And the people said, "Sock it to 'em," and redistribute their wealth. And the people said, "Show us the money." And then he said, "Redistribution of wealth is good for everybody." And Joe the plumber asked, "Are you kidding me? You're going to steal my money and give it to the deadbeats?" And the one ridiculed and taunted him, and Joe's personal records were hacked and publicized. One lone reporter asked, "Isn't that Marxist policy?" And she was banished from the kingdom. Then a citizen asked, "With no foreign relations experience and having zero military experience or knowledge, how will you deal with radical terrorists?" And the one said, "Simple. I shall sit with them and talk with them and show them how nice we really are, and they will forget that they ever wanted to kill us all." And the people said, "Hallelujah! We're safe at last, and we can beat our weapons into free cars for the people." Then the one said, "I shall give 95% of you lower taxes." And one lone voice said, "But 40% of us don't pay any taxes." So the one said, "Then I shall give you some of the taxes the fat cats pay." And the people said, "Hallelujah! Show us the money." Then the one said, "I shall tax your capital gains when you sell your homes." And the people yawned, and the slumping housing market collapsed. And he said, "I shall mandate employer-funded health care for every worker and raise the minimum wage. And I shall give every person unlimited health care and medicine and transportation to the clinics. Oh, except for Muslims shall not pay their share of health care." And the people said, "Give me some of that." Then he said, "I shall penalize employers who ship jobs overseas." And the people said, "Where's my rebate check?" Then the one said, "I shall bankrupt the coal industry and electricity rates will skyrocket." And the people said, "Coal is dirty. Coal is evil. No more coal." But we don't care for that part about higher electric rates. So the one said, "Not to worry. If your rebate isn't enough to cover your expenses, we'll bail you out. Just sign up with the Acorn and your troubles are over." Then he said, "Illegal immigrants feel scorned and slighted. Let's grant them amnesty, Social Security, free education, free lunches, free medical care, bilingual signs, and guaranteed housing." And the people said, "Hallelujah!" And they made him king. And so it came to pass that employers facing spiraling costs and ever higher taxes raised their prices and laid off workers. Others simply gave up and went out of business, and the economy sank like unto a rock dropped from a cliff. The banking industry was destroyed. Manufacturing slowed to a crawl, and more of the people were without means of support. Then the one said, "I am the one, the Messiah, and I'm here to save you. We shall just print more money so everyone will have enough." But our foreign trading partners said unto him, "Wait a minute. Your dollar's not worth a pile of camel dung. You will have to pay more." And the one said, "Wait a minute. That's unfair." And the world said, "Neither are these other idiotic programs you've embraced. Lo, you've become a socialist state and a second-rate power. Now you shall play by our rules." And the people cried out, "Alas, alas, what have we done?" But yea, verily, it was too late. The people set upon the one snapped out of their malaise and rented their clothing. But alas, it was too late. And the change agent's name was changed to dung, and the once mighty nation was no more. And the once proud people were without sustenance or shelter or hope. And the change the one had given them was as like unto a poison that had destroyed them, and like a whirlwind that consumed all they had built. And the people beat their chests in despair and cried out in anguish, Give us back our nation, our pride, our hope. But it was too late, and their homeland was no more. You may think this is a fairy tale, but it's not. It's happening right now. And before you go into the bathroom to throw up, forward this video to your friends and those you know who care about our country and what is happening to it under the rule of Commissar Abomination. Yeah, this is too true to be funny. Tragic, but not funny. Tragic, but true. This is the end of this video, but it doesn't have to be the end of our nation if enough people wake up and wake up others. Will you please help save our nation by forwarding a link to this video? Thank you.
How you doing till next week, Phil Flamel from Tournament USA. See you all next week. Thank you.
You guys have a good Christmas.